Welcome back to the deep dive. Before we even crack open the file for today, and trust me, this is a file a lot of people would prefer stayed deleted. I need a quick favor from you.
Yeah, a really important favor.
Right. If you value what we do here, if you value taking the topics that the mainstream algorithm tries to bury and dragging them into the light, you need to hit that like button.
And make sure you're subscribed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your support is literally the only signal keeping this broadcast alive. So click it now, because today we are walking right into the fire.
We certainly are. This is it's not a comfortable topic.
No.
We are looking at a new ebook that is making some serious waves in the underground commentary sphere. It's called The British Empire: Global Dominance, Discipline, Enlightenment, and Order by Conrad Riker.
And let's be clear right off the bat here. This is not your high school history textbook.
Not at all.
We aren't talking about dates and treaties.
Mhm.
Riker explicitly states this book is not a history lesson. He says it is a weapon.
A manual.
A manual, yeah. And he says it's designed for a very specific audience. It's for men who look at the modern world. You know, the safe spaces, the sensitivity training, the endless bureaucracy, and feel like something vital has been lost.
Right. Riker puts a massive disclaimer right at the front of the book. It's almost like a warning label.
I love that part.
Yeah, he says if you believe in, quote, multicultural utopias or gender fluidity, or if you think the British Empire was just a giant crime scene, you should close the book immediately.
He literally tells those readers to go pick up a rainbow flag or attend a sensitivity seminar.
Exactly. He is not interested in debating them.
He doesn't pull punches. He says this book is for men who want to understand how a small, cold, resource-poor island managed to rule a quarter of the earth.
And his answer isn't luck.
No, it isn't geography either. He argues it was unmatched discipline, hierarchy, and order.
The mission of this deep dive is to really unpack that central argument, to understand the history of our institutions, law, finance, engineering, before they were captured by what he describes as feminists and Marxists.
It's a heavy claim, but he brings the receipts. And just so you know, if you want to read the full manifesto yourself, The British Empire by Conrad Riker is available right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
You definitely want to pick that up.
Yeah, and for the uncensored analysis that doesn't make it into the book,
Yeah.
you need to follow him at Conrad and Riker on Substack.
That's right.
Okay, so help me understand the core thesis here. Where do we even start with this?
Let's start with the engine. Riker argues that Britain wasn't just a country, it was a state of mind.
The state of mind.
Yeah, and the core of that state of mind was discipline. But I want to be really specific here. He's not talking about the get up early and journal kind of self-help discipline we see on Instagram today.
Right.
He's talking about something much darker and much more effective.
He calls it the unsexy truth of empire.
Exactly. We tend to romanticize the pith helmets and the flags and the glory of it all, but Riker points to the grinding repetition.
Right.
He uses the Royal Navy as the prime example. He describes the gun drill on an 18th century frigate.
And for the listener who doesn't know, this isn't pushing a button on a console.
Not even close. You're handling a 32-pound iron cannon. You have to haul it back, sponge the barrel to kill any sparks, ram the powder, ram the shot, run it out, aim, and fire.
And you have to do it fast.
You have to do it in 90 seconds.
90 seconds.
In the smoke, the noise, the blood, on a rolling deck. Riker argues that you don't get men to do that through inspiration or shared values.
Or by making them feel heard.
Right. You get them to do it through muscle memory forged under the absolute threat of punishment.
This is interesting because he draws a really sharp contrast here with the modern education system. This was one of the parts that really jumped out at me.
Oh yeah, it's brutal.
He compares the old imperial model places like Sandhurst, the military academy, and Eton with the modern university.
It's a stark contrast. He notes that at Sandhurst, or in the naval academies, sleep was withheld, food was minimal, and recruits were marched until their boots literally bled.
But he argues the goal wasn't just sadism.
No, the goal was to simulate the stress of war, to inoculate them against panic.
Building a tolerance for misery.
Precisely. He argues that modern universities, on the other hand, offer trauma counselors if a student gets a bad grade. Or here's a word they don't like.
He has this line, let me find it. He says, one system produces officers who lead under fire. The other produces undergrads who file Title IX complaints.
Yeah. And Title IX, for our international listeners, refers to the regulations in the U.S. regarding discrimination in education, which Riker argues has morphed into a tool for policing speech and conduct.
Right. It's the idea that pain is temporary, but shame is permanent. That's the mechanism he's talking about.
Riker argues that because we've removed the hardship, we've stopped producing leaders like Churchill or Kitchener.
Men who could function in high-stress chaos.
Exactly, and instead we started producing liability cases.
He links us directly to something called the silent drill. Can you explain that? Because it sounds almost cinematic.
It is cinematic, but Riker says it wasn't a party trick. It was pure combat readiness. The silent drill was an exercise where a platoon of troops would move in complex formations, changing direction, halting, spinning their rifles,
All in perfect unison.
all in perfect unison without a single verbal command being given.
So how do they even know when to move?
They move based on a collective internal rhythm developed through thousands of hours of repetition. They become a single organism.
Wow.
Riker's point is that you can't achieve that level of coordination with inclusivity, or by asking everyone how they feel about the maneuver.
Right.
You achieve it by crushing the individual ego and prioritizing the group mission above all else. It turns farmers and clerks into a weapon.
So that's the mindset. Total submission to the group objective through discipline. Which brings us to the structure that holds it all together, hierarchy.
Right.
Riker devotes a whole chapter to this. He basically says equality is a myth sold to weak men.
This is where he gets very controversial regarding historical figures. He uses the example of Robert Clive of India. Now, modern historians often view Clive as a monster, a sociopath, or a symbol of corporate greed. Riker views him as a case study in raw effectiveness.
Because Clive wasn't a king, right? He was basically a corporate middle manager for the East India Company.
Exactly. He started as a writer, a
Okay.
clerk, but he understood power. Riker emphasizes that Clive wasn't nice. He wasn't trying to be inclusive.
He was ruthless.
He was ruthless. When he took control of Bengal, he didn't set up a committee. He established a strict chain of command.
And the results were staggering. Riker throws out these financial figures that just blow your mind. Clive extracted something like 2.5 million pounds from Bengal.
And to put that in context, in today's money, that's over 300 million pounds.
Insane.
But it's not just the money, it's the stability. Riker compares that ROI, that return on investment, to modern foreign aid.
Oh, this part is brutal.
It really is. He mentions that the UN spent billions in places like South Sudan, deploying thousands of peacekeepers over a decade, and achieved almost zero lasting political stability.
That is a harsh comparison.
It is harsh, but Riker's point isn't that looting is good. His point is that hierarchy works. Clive stabilized a subcontinent with a fraction of the force the UN uses today because Clive didn't believe in equality.
He believed in orders.
He believed in orders.
Yeah.
Riker argues that modern institutions fail because no one is actually in charge. Everyone is terrified of being called a tyrant, so nothing gets done.
This leads us into probably the most provocative part of the book, the biological realism.
Yeah.
Riker doesn't just say men were tougher back then. He says they were biologically different. He talks about testosterone as a literal historical force.
He cites some fascinating, if controversial, data here.
Right.
He references studies analyzing grip strength and bone density records. And he claims that in 1879, the average British officer in the field had testosterone levels equivalent to roughly 30% higher than today's average civil servant.
30% higher. That is a massive drop.
It's huge.
That's the difference between an athlete and a geriatric patient in some contexts.
It is. And Riker argues that this biology drove the behavior. He claims that high testosterone men are chemically wired to take risks.
He points to men like Shackleton or Livingston.
Exactly. They didn't walk into malaria-infested jungles because they wanted to express themselves or find their truth.
Right.
They did it because they had a biological drive to conquer the unknown.
Riker says the Empire weaponized this biology.
Yeah.
But today he argues we pathologize it. We call it toxic masculinity.
Exactly. He even mentions that modern inclusive leadership seminars, the kind corporate HR departments absolutely love, have been shown in some studies to actually lower testosterone in participants.
So literally the training is neutering the leadership instinct,
Yeah.
according to Riker.
Yes.
And you see the result of this in conflict resolution. Riker talks about the duel. This really illustrates the shift in the modern mindset.
The duel is the ultimate example of having skin in the game. In 1829, the Duke of Wellington, the sitting Prime Minister of Great Britain, the man who defeated Napoleon, was challenged to a duel over a political dispute regarding Catholic emancipation.
A sitting prime minister.
Yes, and he accepted. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't file a harassment complaint.
He showed up with a pistol.
He showed up with a pistol. Now, they both missed. intentionally or not. But the point Riker makes is that the duel was a mechanism for accountability.
It meant that a man's word had physical consequences.
Right.
Can you imagine a modern prime minister or CEO doing that today?
It's unthinkable. But Riker argues that when you replace the duel with the HR complaint, you lose honor. You lose the spine that Riker keeps talking about.
You create a society where people can say anything, lie, or slander others without any risk of physical repercussion.
He calls it the feminization of conflict.
So we have the mindset, which is discipline. We have the biology, which is strength and hierarchy. Now let's talk about the operating system.
Right, because the Empire wasn't just guys with guns and high testosterone.
Exactly. It was tech, law, and logistics.
Riker calls this the export of order. He argues that the true power of the Empire was its ability to impose structure on chaos. Look at the Royal Navy again. It wasn't just fighting battles, it was mapping the ocean.
They enforce Greenwich Mean Time.
Yes.
Explain that for a second.
Yeah.
Why is Greenwich Mean Time just a simple clock setting? Why is that a weapon?
Because before that time was local, noon was just whenever the sun was highest where you happened to be. You can't run a global supply chain or coordinate a synchronized naval movement if everyone is on a different time.
Right.
By forcing the world to set their clocks to London, Britain literally synchronized the planet's operating system to their own. That is absolute dominance.
And then there's the industrial capacity.
Yeah.
He talks about the Bessemer converter.
This is crucial. The Bessemer process was the first method for mass-producing steel from molten pig iron. Before this, steel was incredibly expensive. After Bessemer, Britain could produce steel rails, steel ships, and steel bridges cheaply and in massive quantities.
He has a stat in the book. In 1897, Britain was producing 30% of the world's manufactured goods, with just 2% of the global population.
2% of the people making 30% of the stuff. Riker calls that a weapon. It was the sheer ability to produce reality steel, ships, rails that allowed them to project power.
And Riker's very specific about the language used around this machinery, too.
Oh yeah, he gets really frustrated with the modern push to rename things.
He talks about the F-35 fighter jet engine,
Right.
built by Rolls-Royce.
Right, he says it's a machine designed by men, built by men, flown by men, but the government wants to use gender-neutral language. He flat out refuses to say fireperson. He insists on fireman or man-made.
He argues that language reflects reality. If you start softening the language, you soften the reality.
You start believing that a fighter jet is a safe space rather than an instrument of death and war. He thinks this linguistic shift is a symptom of a society that is terrified of its own capacity for violence, which ironically makes it less safe.
He also tackles the concept of cultural imperialism. And Riker is completely unapologetic about this.
Completely.
He says civilization isn't a dialogue, it's an imposition.
This is where he will lose a lot of modern readers, but he doubles down. The classic example he uses is Lord William Bentinck banning sati in India in the 1820s.
And sati was the practice of burning widows alive on their husbands' funeral pyres.
Right. And at the time, the local religious leaders said, hey, this is our culture, back off.
They complained it was cultural imperialism.
Exactly. And Bentinck basically said, you have your custom of burning widows. We have our custom of hanging men who burn women. Let us all follow our national customs.
I love that quote, Riker's take on that. He calls it basic decency backed by rifles.
Backed by rifles, that's the key phrase. Riker argues that sometimes you have to be intolerant of chaos to create civilization.
He contrasts this with modern foreign aid again.
Right. We spend billions on soft projects, pamphlets, awareness campaigns, gender studies in Afghanistan. Stuff that often fails the moment we leave. The British built railways and telegraphs that are still in use a century later.
He also mentions the Thuggee cult.
The Thuggees. Yes. This was a group of ritual murderers who would strangle travelers. The British crushed them.
They didn't try to understand their lived experience.
No, they didn't treat it as a misunderstood spiritual tradition. They treated them as criminals and hunted them down. Riker argues that true order requires the will to judge certain behaviors as unacceptable and stamp them out.
This brings us to the glue that held it all together. Chapter 6, Homogeneity.
Yeah.
This is going to be a tough pill for the modern listener, but Riker insists on it. He says the empire worked because the ruling class was homogeneous.
He uses the Tower of Babel argument.
Yeah.
He claims that multiculturalism is effectively a suicide pact for a nation.
A suicide pact.
His logic is that you cannot build a complex system like a railway through the Himalayas or a global naval network if you are doing it by committee with people who don't share a language, a code, or a loyalty.
So he's saying diversity isn't a strength. It's a friction point.
In terms of operational efficiency, yes.
Yeah.
He believes shared ancestry and shared culture create trust, and trust creates speed.
If everyone understands the code, if everyone went to the same schools, read the same books, and believes in the same God, you don't need to explain orders.
You just act.
And he points to the decline in standards as proof of what happens when you lose that cohesion.
Yeah.
There's this story about the Indian clerk in 1890.
Yes, he mentions a clerk in Calcutta who could calculate compound interest in his head and draft legal briefs in perfect Queen's English.
And he contrasts this with a World Bank statistic about modern education.
Right, and we should preface this by saying this is a critique of the systems, not the individuals. The statistic is that a shocking percentage, 70% of 15-year-olds in certain regions of Nigeria are unable to read simple sentences.
70%.
Riker links this to the indigenization of the curriculum. He argues that by removing the colonial standards and relaxing the rigor in the name of inclusivity, they didn't liberate the students, they de-educated them.
That is a devastating perspective.
Riker sees this as the internal rot of the West. He believes we didn't fall because of an external enemy. We fell because we traded duty for desire.
We traded the hard standards of the clerk for the soft bigotry of low expectations.
Exactly. We stopped asking people to be excellent and started asking them to just be themselves.
He really hammers home that point.
Yeah.
That the West is collapsing from within. We've replaced courage with compliance. We've replaced the explorer with the bureaucrat.
And that leads to his ultimate conclusion. The book isn't asking us to go back to 1850. We can't uninvent the modern world. Riker says this is a forensic bisection. He wants to isolate the principles, discipline, hierarchy, biological reality, so they can be applied today.
He calls it a manual for rebuilding men, families, and nations.
He points out that the empire isn't actually dead. Its systems are still running the world. Global finance, the legal system, the English language.
These are British inventions.
The software is still there, but Riker argues we've lost the hardware, we've lost the men with the spine to run it.
So the machine is just sitting there idling,
Yeah.
waiting for a driver.
Exactly. He says the system is waiting for men to pick up the mantle again. That's the challenge he leaves you with. It's not about nostalgia, it's about strategy.
He asks the reader, are you capable of the discipline required to run the machine? Or are you just a passenger?
And if you aren't willing to be disliked, you aren't ready to lead. That is Riker's bottom line.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to chew on. Something that Riker hints at, but we can take a step further. Think about the digital world we live in today. The algorithms, the artificial intelligence, the very code that runs the internet. We use these tools to endlessly debate equality and inclusivity.
We do.
But the architecture of that technology is purely binary. It is built on rigid, unforgiving, hierarchical logic. Zeros and ones, true or false, the ultimate expression of order.
Doesn't care about your feelings.
Exactly. The modern digital empire operates on the exact same strict, unyielding principles Riker describes. It's just waiting to be wielded by those who actually understand its true nature.
That is a powerful way to look at it.
If this conversation fired you up, if you're nodding your head thinking finally someone said it, then you need to get the book. It's called The British Empire, Global Dominance, Discipline, Enlightenment, and Order by Conrad Riker.
It is available on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books right now.
And, like we said earlier, for the stuff that is too hot even for the book, you need to go follow at Conrad Riker on Substack. That's where the real deep dive continues.
You won't want to miss that.
That is going to do it for this deep dive. If you want us to keep bringing you these forbidden manuals, you know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with a friend who needs to hear it. We'll see you on the next one. Stay disciplined,